Hello, dear friends. Today is our 7th August, Thursday. Today I have very important information for you, which is a continuation of yesterday's previous video. Therefore, I ask you to help the maximum spread. This is fate. This is the fate of Ukraine, most likely all of Europe, Russia, including, well, the Trump administration. Finally, the following. I want to warn you in advance, counting the accumulated experience on my channel. I will tell you based on the publications in the American and Western printouts. In general, it is mostly about the NATO country as well as Russia, since it participates in all this. If I consider it necessary to make my comment, I will tell you about this. Therefore, if I do not talk about this, do not mix me with what I will tell you, let's say about the plans of peaceful regularization of Ukraine. This is not me who offer it, this is what certain people have thought up and what is being discussed now. We will analyze all this with you now and see where all this is moving. Well, we stopped yesterday on the fact that Trump is happy to report the near operation of the three-way meeting, Trump-Putin-Zelensky. It turned out that to some degree, well, by 30%, Trump gave the desire for real. As it turned out, amendments from Moscow came. It is currently about a two-way meeting of Putin and Trump, we assumed. That these two would try to share, well, the world in general, maybe, if the question about Ukraine can be solved, to solve it between themselves. Whether it will be between them, we will see. I think that it will hardly be possible because there are too many interested sides and deeply interested people who are involved in this case. And today the Polish publication won't publish the material that it called Trump's plan, which was given to the Russian side by Witkoff. Well, first of all, what is WANT? WANT is considered one of the most serious information resources in Poland. It owns perhaps the largest information monster in Europe, the German-Swiss concern, the Springer concern. It is considered a solid source of a liberal direction. Well, Poland is a state, in fact, like Ukraine, to a significant degree politicized, so inside Poland. Among the Polish audience, these political moods of a separate group of people, they influence the assessment of one or another information resource. One was criticism of liberalism, this is liberal, and they were critical of the fact that it was allegedly not objective to cover what was called the conservative direction of policy. But in this case, it does not matter at all. As for the true fact, there were never any claims for one about the materials that the publication publishes, and there are no, and in this case there are no, in this case. In relation to the publication that I will now tell you about, there are also no refutations yet. Moreover, there is indirect confirmation that everything that is laid out here, what I will tell you about, is indeed so. This is what this publication reports. In fact, it publishes a plan of Trump who was supposedly given, as I say supposedly because I'm not 100% sure, to Witkowo yesterday, and which received a positive assessment of the Kremlin. This is what this publication writes. This meeting of Witkowo with Putin was the last agreement in Trump's current policy regarding Moscow. A dramatically supply of beginning. Apparently, the conversation really reached a critical moment when two chickens are carrying each other to a meeting and someone has to pull it back or else. A catastrophe will happen. Well, in this case, the catastrophe probably meant entry against Russia's sanctions. According to Wundt, the subject of Witkovo's conversation was the agreed attention with the European countries, the proposal for a peace deal presented to Russia by the United States. That is, once again, this is a plan that was developed by the Trump administration, which is agreed with the European leaders. It must be assumed that Zelensky was aware of the fact that he participated in the telephone conversation. And with Trump, and then after the visit of Vitkov to Kremlin, Zelensky discussed the previous negotiations and with the European leaders, and how we managed to establish it. Moscow received a very beneficial proposal from the Trump administration. Well, a very beneficial proposal was called by the assistants, the main assistants of Putin on foreign policy matters, Ushakov. Indeed, and beneficial to Russia in comparison to what Russia achieved a week ago, so to speak. This is a question of discussion. I think that Ushakov did this statement most likely for the internal audience because, as we will see, what is in this so-called plan is not at all and not all the wanted and not the most important wanted that the Kremlin launched in November 2021 and in fact explained the beginning of the aggression against Russia, the refusal of the West to observe or voluntarily positively react to these wanted. According to the further document, Russia and the United States agreed that the next day would be Putin's meeting with Trump. What is interesting in this plan, yesterday evening at about 9 o'clock in the evening, that is, Witkoff was already in Washington, apparently reported to Trump about the existence of the negotiations. So, it's happening at about 9 o'clock in the evening on Fox. Rubin is the state secretary and an aide to Trump on national security, and he says, well, we don't have a reason to hurry up with this meeting. Because now we would only get the general, so to speak, we would get the position of Russia better, we would even get the position of Russia better, we would get the position of Russia better, more likely the position of Russia on the regularization of Ukraine. Now we must discuss the question of how Ukraine treats this, how European allies are, then see how close these two positions are, and then start working on their close-up, and when it is already as close as possible, this position is being close to each other. Then probably this meeting will be needed. That is, he put this case on a quite far perspective. Here is the question: did he not know about this plan of Trump's assistants and the Secretary of State of the United States of America? If he did not know, if he did not develop it, if he, that is, Trump reacted much faster at the end of the conversation with Witkova and called them positive when Rubio was still in the state of pessimism. This is when the question arises, who made this plan? It can be assumed that, okay, if it's not Trump's administration, then it's Putin's administration. But then, how to agree with the thesis on that this plan was pre-agreed with the European leaders? Well, thinking back to 2016 when Trump's first foreign policy speech was written, it can be assumed that this plan, in general, was written in the Kremlin and gave it to Trump. Trump made a move on it, previously discussed it with the leaders and returned it back as already in his proposal in the Kremlin. And in the Kremlin, in principle, yesterday they said we received important, very positive signals that everything is fine, we are going to the meeting, but we will wait until Trump says so. How Trump reacts in his evening expected speech, and then we will say our own completely. Trump reacted with joy. Well, here Moscow immediately called it a very beneficial proposal, over which they will work, and this is what these proposals are about. Here, before going to a specific point, Wundt, apparently based on communication with the representatives The corresponding representatives of the Polish authorities, first of all, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, including the Minister Sikorski, as well as probably with other European leaders, make such a remark. The possible refusal of Moscow to this proposal would mean that even the most loyal policies of Europe to Moscow, yes, and the United States should have lost all illusions about the possibility of the conclusion of any compromised agreement with Russia. That is, this is the last border, the last, so to speak, proposal of Trump. But it turns out from the situation that Trump went, or rather sent Witkoff and himself, as they say, transcendentally moved to Kremlin to meet with Putin not as a chicken, but as a hound with the last warning. That is, with chicken, I say this conditionally. It seems it was Putin who accepted these suggestions, which provides for peace in Ukraine. Peace, not peace, and this is right. We will discuss further why. Next, the territories that Russia won in February 2022, the question of their legal hope will be put to 49 or 99 years. That is, in fact, they will remain under the control of Russia, but not legal. I will remind you before Trump, about a couple of months ago when he tried to pull Putin's negotiations about the peace, he even said that America does not want Europeans. God forbid America admits these occupied territories. Now this is not. Next, there is no detail about what is meant by territorial gains. The fact is that, Russia included all 4 areas there, together with the cities of Kherson, Zaporozhye, and they control only the areas but not the cities. Russia has not taken any large city of Ukraine, so detail is needed here. Either it's about control, the storage of Russian control over really occupied territories, or, as they used to require, they also required cities. Well, cities are impudence. Russia would not have taken them, but to include them in its constitution, well, let's say so. This is not an international order, this is just a case. I want to convince you right away my personal attitude to everything that is happening. If all this is accepted and signed, this is not an act of capitulation, which is signed when a side is completely broken, defeated, admits its defeat. In this case, Russia's losses in live force, they surpass the losses of Ukrainian armed forces. Ukrainian armed forces carried out a colossal, largest strike during the Second World War, also a strike on Russia's defense capabilities, including its weapons systems, armored vehicles, and so on. The count is going to thousands, dozens of thousands. The country's economy has been struck by the most powerful strike, and Russia has gone all over it, in front of the real economic crisis and financial bankruptcy. Only with these I can explain that Russia went and welcomed these offers gladly, calling them beneficial. So once again, it is not about capitulation, but about the path situation. And the path situation, the military actions end up with a peace. This is not a peace deal, but a peace. That is, this is what is being talked about now. Next, the next point, that is, the first, in the peace; the second, there remains control over the occupied territories; the third, the cancellation of the majority of sanctions introduced against Russia. Well, apparently it will not be immediately, but gradually. There is a reason for this, to see how Russia will perform all other duties. And in the future, as they say at this point, also with the help of energy cooperation, that is, the import of Russian gas and oil. Where, here it is not said, well, we know Europe. We have talked about this case many times. This is the central part of all this plan for Trump. This is cheap. This is carrot, candy, chocolate from the Kremlin table to Trump. I watched him when he told, even on the eve of Witkova, on the trip to Witkova, he told about the fact that he will go there will be a peace deal, there will be meetings. His lips were even moisturized when he said how Russia can become rich, how much money we can earn if we stop this. Insane war, that is remember how a stam bender he fell asleep and a brilliant dust dreamed of him like this, probably for Donald Trump. And the dream is to resume energy cooperation. I will tell you more about this. The foreign minister Del Sikorsky said, in the package, yes, this is what is there, what is not there, and this is extremely important. There are no desire for Russia to talk about the further non-proliferation of NATO, and this is like a thunder in the middle of the sky because remember, Russia has supposedly started a war against Ukraine because of this. She was whining all the time that NATO was scary, threatening its security, and this was said by agents and Kremlin's drinking shots, and I understood the story in quite detail, showing the falsehood of this thesis, on which the whole explanation of the justify Russian aggression against Ukraine was based for 3.5 years, even more. Without the possibility of Ukraine being included or accepted into NATO or into another Western military and political structure, for Ukraine, any regularity is completely doubtful, if at all target-oriented. That is, Russia, as it emphasizes that NATO has always inevitably demanded guarantees of non-proliferation of NATO. They are not there. Moscow has also not received any promises to stop the military support of Ukraine. And this is right, because no peace deal, no peace without the strengthening of the Ukrainian armed forces, it has no meaning. We already know this from a recent story just recently, starting from 2014. Well, it is not clear whether Russians will insist on this or not, I emphasize. Ushakov said a very beneficial proposal. He did not say that something was not right for them there. Then, from the Danya Wunt writes, the details of the proposals received by Moscow were the question of the proposals received by Moscow. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sikorsky, was asked on a specific question about whether it is possible to resume energy cooperation with Russia. He responded, attention, quote, someday this war will end. Russia has been a source of raw materials for the European Union for hundreds of years. Well, the minister, of course, made a mistake over the course of the 100 years, but here, in fact, using a diplomatic terminology, the minister said that yes, when the war ends, Russia has a chance to return to the supply of gas and oil to the European continent. Again, this is and is, that is, Western Europe perfectly understood that this is and is Geschichte, Trump, and without Geschichte, any foreign policy is a major issue. Now the administration of the United States does not dare, or dare for a long time and not very well. How can this be done? When the Europeans took the European Union, the 18th package, I was glad when they wrote that no companies, no organization, and no private individuals of the European Union can participate in any business projects with the help of northern flows. Denver said that Trump's blue dream is to resume the work of these flows. Apparently, a secondary owner or stockpile will appear there, to which the American one will point out, to whom Trump will most likely point out. Well, in this way, the American company that will be indicated by Trump, or rather, it will be even Trump Organization, which allegedly holds only his son, he allegedly has no connection with this. And we'll deal with this cheap case. I will remind you that a person who is an American civilian, who apparently is in the orbit of communication, the closest orbit of communication of Trump by the name Lynch, has already received permission from the United States government, it was almost a year ago, to do this case. And he did this case very actively. That is, this is where, as Gorbachev said, the dog is by and large. This Lynch said that the one who will put this flow under control after the end of the war in Ukraine, he will become the richest person in the world. All the time until carbohydrates will be the main source of energy on the ground ball, and it will be long, he said. Well, one writes that the statement of Sikorsky, although it was very diplomatic and not very specific, apparently confirms our information that the suggestions made by the Americans are very far-reaching. Next, it is analyzed in what situation all this happened. And pay attention, that is, two sides played. I think that this was definitely played out in the Kremlin. That is, a whole spectacle was played out. Both sides played almost a nuclear hysteria when I don't know, the person who is called Medvedev allegedly wrote something there, threatened Trump, and Trump sent nuclear submarines and said in the world, God forbid, again nuclear war. That is, here the spectacle is played out, that the world is put on the border of nuclear war. It is necessary to solve the question urgently. For this reason, it is necessary to donate to everyone, because there is no more important question in the world than the question of the violation of nuclear war. Therefore, if you do not like that some settlement or village of Ukraine should be given Russian control for 49 years, well, sorry. That is, there are chances now to be or not to be from life on the ground. Here, in fact, it is this that is affected in such a way that this performance, apparently, was played not by chance, but target-orientedly. Why is this needed by both sides? It is needed not only by Trump to force Putin to sit at the negotiating table, but it is needed by Putin because he has his own statements, then the activity of many propaganda rags that work on the Kremlin. A whole hysteria has been created among the groups of most exalted orcs who require terrible victory. We will not stand for the price, we will die for the Russian world. In general, this is full of extreme idiocy of orcs. And Putin is forced to pay attention to them because, for example, there was Prigozhin, you remember, who, in the end, turned to the Kremlin. Could he reach? Or no one stopped him, so Putin, already commemorating this recent story, needs to somehow convince these people. And for this, it is necessary to show that, well, like this, we were talking to the Americans and came to the edge of a nuclear war, so guys, we need to stop everything, we got a good offer, we need to end the war. That is, in this way, the bell ringing in intensity, scaling it to the limit, appears in two blindly white frags, Donetsk, Macedon and Blednaya Mola, and saves the world from a nuclear catastrophe. That is, it is already not a temporary peace, more precisely, between the aggressor, who broke a bunch of documents of international law, actually a military criminal. Russia is a state, a military criminal. It destroyed the system of security of Europe in large number in a flurry of gunpowder. First of all, it concerns the Hessian Agreement. it squandered the fundamental documents of the Organization of Unification and Nations. It actually put a deal under threat of unification of nuclear weapons, because if you want to do the job, well, theoretically, Putin would want it. And let's say in the most terrible dream, he would achieve his own, that is, the defeat of Ukraine, the capitulation. What happens after that? After that, the mass appearance of frogs appears. After the rain, the state would appear new owners of nuclear weapons, so that everyone would understand that only nuclear weapons in this world can guarantee the security of a specific country. And therefore, one makes the conclusion that the increase in tenseness, this is the recent one, is exhausted. It is a sign that the agreement is rather close than far away. That is, they have already reached the necessary degree of tenseness, and therefore they are in hurry. Rubio apparently did not understand this at all. He said, well, let's see, we need to work further with the experts. And Donnie, he is in hurry, he said honestly in days, there should be a meeting and is already working on this. Where is the meeting? Putin held a meeting today, according to the British press, with the Sheikh, the president, and millions of Arab Emirates, and allegedly agreed that these negotiations will take place there. I would not rule out the fact that in fact they will go to some other place from the point of view of security. Putin is a coward, he can wipe marks, so do not be surprised if this meeting takes place somewhere else. I don't think there were hints recently about Turkey, but I don't think that Putin will risk going to Turkey. According to the publication, the introduction of secondary sanctions, which, like a guillotine, were hanging over the head of Putin on the eve of the visit of Witkovo. So, if he refused to take this proposal, well, first of all, it would become all clear in the West that it would be useless to talk further. It would become clear to the Americans. And then, from the 8th of July, what was promised is being launched. This meant stopping the exports of Russian raw materials and inevitably led to the collapse of the Russian economy and the budget, as the newspaper writes. Well, and the comment, this is my personal comment now, a question arises. So who was the catch in this particular case? Everyone expected Tacker, Trump, and of course, Shvets, but it seems that Putin was still Shvets. And it seems also that the real state of the Russian economy, despite the fact that the Kremlin survived, said that everything was fine there, but the real state of the Russian economy and finance is, in large part, in predefarred state. Therefore, it is necessary to forge iron while it is hot. Next question, then, I would say, who wrote this plan? Judging by the statements of the insecure Rubin yesterday at 9 o'clock in the evening, I have the impression that it was not quite clear about the details of this plan. And apparently, Trump gets information and got information from the Kremlin, in addition to his state secretary, an advisor of national security on some other channel, even bypassing Witkoff. Because I paid attention, Witkoff was supposed to be still, as they say, in the lift, flying through the Atlantic, when Trump was already happy here, shouting that everything was fine, there was a lot of success, and so on. The British newspaper The Guardian notes that the prospect of negotiations of Putin and Trump without the help of Ukraine and the European allies can cause an alarm in Kiev. And this is a natural alarm. Well, let's start with the European allies. Trump himself put responsibility on Europe and first of all on NATO for providing help to Ukraine. NATO completely became the manufacturer, that is, the main coordinator, organizer of help to Ukraine, and it was clear The administration itself, its representatives, the United States, said that the question concerns, first and foremost, European security. They are forever interested in this. This is their security, their life, so they should spend money. That's right, but now it is necessary for Alvord to return this question. If Europe is carrying and will carry out, according to the conclusion of this peace deal, first, when the peace deal is signed, or the peace deal is signed, and then, when the peace deal is signed, I will remind you that Russia does not even have a peace deal with Japan, and the United States does not have a peace deal with Korea since 1953. There is an act of peace and no more so here. Europe remains the main ally, the main, so to speak, guarantee of Ukraine's security, but here the road, so to speak, goes in two directions. Ukraine, with its existence and its defense power, it is to a significant degree a guarantee, like the frontier that separates Europe from the crazy. Barbarian, and Europe is a financial, economic, military insurer, so to speak, of the interests of Ukraine, so no peace on a large scale. Even theoretically, no world can be stable if the Europeans do not take part in this settlement. I think that Europeans, with the diplomatic skill which they have demonstrated in recent months, by developing Trump by 180 degrees in relation to Ukraine, the war with Ukraine, they will achieve their own. Now, as for Zelensky, I think Zelensky, as far as I understand, is breaking away from Putin. I think such a meeting, in any case now and in the foreseeable future, would be extremely unfavorable for Zelensky, for Ukraine, and, in general, counterproductive in several directions. Well, first of all, I would tell when it is long, because when the leaders of the state begin to solve specific technical small matters of a large agreement, then, as a rule, the result is very, very unsuccessful. In particular, Henry Kissinger wrote how he, after the team of experts in two countries of the American Soviet Union, could not come to the soul of the question of how much, in what area, in two countries there should be a mine for ground-based missiles, right? The question. They decided to solve this question of Brezhnev-Kissinger. Kissinger wrote, and the understanding was not that what it was. We spent several hours, and I never had any more useless hours in my life. Indeed, this is so. That is, the question should be decided by experts. Secondly, it is clear that PR will play almost the main role in this question, first and foremost, for Putin. If Zelensky appears there, he will be, Putin, he will walk on wreaths, he will image himself as a Macedonian, a great Belgelma conqueror, who conquered Ukraine. He will demonstrate that this is not a fact situation, not a peace deal, but capitulation. He will blow teeth, and in Russia there is much more information about propaganda capabilities. It will be all over the world. Ukraine does not have such information opportunities, did not take care of its powerful managers. It is necessary to create such a tool for the information war. Therefore, Ukraine, although purely technical even, will lose in this matter, will completely lose, and all this will turn into a mess. Putin will blow checks, Zelensky will be angry at the blow checks, and it will really be a mess. Also, their presence there in general is not needed at all in this. I will remind you, that is, we have recorded a path situation on the battlefield. There are no losers or losers here. There is temporarily occupied territory, as in Korea, in fact. Therefore, a document will be signed that will record the path situation. And it will be similar to the agreement on the truce signed in Korea on July 27, 1953. Here, pay attention to who signed this agreement, the truce. This is a purely military document, and it was signed by the representatives of the military commandos. There was no one there, including the head of the state and the government. The middle of the sign was General Lieutenant of the U.S. Army William Harrison from the Command of the Unified Nations. There it is, it was allegedly the American Army, it was allegedly the UN. Army, then General Mark Clark, the head of the Unified Nations Command, then it is from the American side. From the side of North Korea, General Nam In-er, the senior delegate of the Korean People's Army, Kim Il-san, the high-ranking commander, Pen Dae-Huey, the commander of the Chinese peoples. Volunteers, these are the ones who saved North Korea from the Americans. It should be noted that Southern Korea refused to sign the agreement, although it stated that it would not interfere with its implementation. And so it continues until now. I will tell you more. Even when the Second World War ended with the defeat of Japan, the Act of Unmanned Capitulation of Japan was signed on September 2, 1945. On the board of the American Lincoln Mitsuri under the name of Japan, this act was signed. Mamoru Seijimitsu, Minister of Foreign Affairs, who was a representative of the emperors and the government. Yesitsuru Umsu, Chairman of the General Staff under the name of the Union States. General Mark Carter, Supreme Commander, Chester, German, Admiral Flotta. Su Yunchan, General, who represented the Chinese People's Republic. Bruce Fryerazer, Admiral, who represented the UK. Kuzma Derivanko, General, Lieutenant, who represented the Soviet Union. I remember the name. Derivanko represented the Soviet Union. Thomas Blamey, General, who represented Austria, then Colonel, who represented Canada. Philip Louisa, General, who represented France. The representative was from the Netherlands and even from New Zealand. Therefore, taking into account this explanation, I think that apparently I have never supported Putin in any way. For example, that if Putin is for, then I am definitely against it. But in this case, when Putin says that there is a point, apparently, to meet with Zelensky, already at the end to put a point, it is necessary to sign, then, probably, it is necessary to hold this meeting. I will tell you frankly, even then it is not necessary to hold this meeting, because Putin and all the huge equipment of Russian propaganda will imagine all this, as if Putin were to be almost General Mercator, who signs acts of capitulation with Ukraine defeated in the face of its lost leader, Zelensky. This will be not true, this will be not so, it will be nonsense, so don't, I think, break through this. As for the current diplomatic activity, Ukraine has wonderful allies, which, I repeat, they have done a massive diplomatic work in the last half of the year. By amplifying Trump's Ukrainian issue to 180 degrees, they did it, they read it and played it out just by note, just by note. I think that even further they will perform, honestly perform their work, because this is their own security. They know from the history, starting from 2014, that if this agreement or pact does not be decent for Ukraine, then this is just a mine. As the Americans say, booby trap, this is a mine of slowed down actions for fools which will definitely explode. They should be interested. Yes, and Trump on a large scale, if it comes to the fact that the Russian gas through the American company will again return to Western Europe, then the last thing Trump will need is another resumption of military actions. Ladies and gentlemen, what is the situation with this case? I will repeat again what I told you. I think this is A real document, I would quote it from the Polish publication Prylchny, which uses the authority as a reliable source of tested, reliable information. Let's say, reliable information. Let's keep an eye on the further development of the events. I am somewhat worried about Trump's speed. I'm on the side of Rubio, who would like to do all this more seriously, more constantly, understanding that success or failure in this case will be in the small print. Because Russians will definitely put some kind of beep there, and then I will scream for 10 years as they are shouting now, pulling it out of the documents. There was a statement in Istanbul once, and there was a small phrase that security cannot be indivisible. That's it, there is nothing more. They blew up a whole principle of international law created by blowing up the jaws. It's complete nonsense. That is, they are needed eye to eye, they need to be followed by each and every letter. They have huge experience in creating such mine-level actions. Ukrainian representatives, yes, they should be there as experts, but I have serious concerns in this regard. That is, the politicization in Ukraine has reached such a degree that either they are ours or they are not ours. They are the enemy. Ours are 5 strong managers in gold unitas. This is the limit of the capabilities of the intellectual current authorities, and I do not think that there is someone who could make a serious intellectual contribution to the development of this pact or deal. You need to attract real specialists. They are in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, yes, in general, in the intellectual and professional elite of Ukraine. They are there, and it should not be necessary for them to be 30 or 25 years old or even older. But let's see how it will actually happen. This is what I wanted to tell you, gentlemen. I understand how difficult the war is, according to what you write in the answer. And let's say this. Fact shocked me yesterday. Russia accepted this proposal of Trump, his plan, and said everything is good, we will work in this direction. Today, whispers are heard from the Kremlin, but yesterday, Witkoff was still on his way through the Atlantic to Washington. These scumbags, they were subjected to the barber bomb of Dnipro. They write to me, 30 shots, the city is burning. And these are the beasts who just a few hours ago said to Witkoff that we are for the world, for the fair, everything should be good, security should be unbreakable, and so on. That is, we have a relationship with who we have, and moreover, taking into account this, the only 100% reliable holding back mechanism is having nuclear weapons. This Ukraine should have in mind. That is, now there is a need for peace. It should be as much as enough for Ukraine to reborn the city destroyed by barbarians, the economy to become a powerful military modern state. It can become the first most professional powerful state in Europe. And so that never anyone comes to mind in Moscow, we can repeat the thoughts. I think that when developing this document, fact or agreement with Red lines for Ukraine, taking into account that this is a patriot state now in the battlefields, it should be red lines. Russia can leave it under control, maybe, if you say so, only the territories that it really controls. There are no talks in Kherson and Zaporozhye. Then NATO. NATO is an organization that has a principle that is open doors. And this should be preserved, supporting Ukraine's security after stopping military actions, after signing a peace deal or agreement. Ukraine's security is a bloodthirsty stone to a new agreement, and therefore Ukraine should have the right to arm itself and enter a more large military political organization, Western one, like NATO, and in this way build its own collective security system. Without this, it will all be a temporary document. The story of 2014 will be repeated there, and so on. On this, dear friends, let me end today's video. As always, glory to Ukraine and the armed forces. They have become an incredible army which considered itself really the second army in the world, was worn out. In the battles of Ukraine without help, not only with weapons, not only with money, not only with economic help, but even with live force, Russia could not clean, free even its own territory. This is an embarrassment. I mean that they have been preparing for this war for a very, very long time. Well, we can say so, at least since 2007. This is the Munich speech of Putin. This is a failure. Its most ambitious goals and demands want NATO goes to. The West, the border of 1997, they are not even discussed. It's a pity that Ukraine had to pay with such blood for this. This is a morale, political, and historical victory of the Ukrainian people. Therefore, dear friends, to the glory of Ukraine by the armed forces, the enemy will be broken, victory will be ours. You, dear friends, as always, hold out the courage and firm belief in your inevitable victory. Until we meet again very soon.